The blood on Yates Xander's knuckles had barely dried when Adelaide Brooks first saw him standing in the doorway of her father's general store, his shadow stretching across the wooden floorboards like a dark promise of violence yet to come. It was July 1878 in Georgetown, Colorado, a silver mining town nestled in the Rocky Mountains where fortunes were made and lost with equal speed, and where men who could handle themselves with fists and firearms were both feared and necessary. Adelaide had heard the whispers about the new ranch hand who had drifted into town 3 months prior, the man who had killed 2 claim jumpers with his bare hands and put 3 more in the doctor's office with injuries that would remind them for the rest of their lives not to steal what wasn't theirs. The stories painted him as something less than human, a force of nature wrapped in leather and denim, with eyes that promised death to anyone foolish enough to cross him. But standing there in the afternoon light filtering through the store's front windows, all Adelaide saw was a man who looked tired. His dark hair needed cutting, his jaw was sharp beneath several days of stubble, and those eyes everyone feared were the color of storm clouds gathering over the mountains. He was tall, probably 6 feet and a few inches, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway and hands that hung loose at his sides, those bloodied knuckles speaking of recent conflict. "Can I help you?" Adelaide asked, setting down the ledger she had been updating. Her father was in Denver on business, leaving her to manage the store for the week, and she felt a flutter of nervousness despite her determination not to show it. She was 22 years old, had been running this store alongside her father since her mother passed 5 years ago, and she would not be intimidated in her own place of business. Yates removed his hat, and something in that simple gesture of respect made Adelaide's breath catch. "I need to purchase some supplies, madam," he said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle, a low rumble that seemed at odds with his reputation. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," she lied, smoothing her hands over her apron. "What do you need?" He approached the counter slowly, as if aware that sudden movements might frighten her, and pulled a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket. "Mr. Garrett sent me with a list. The ranch is running low on a few things." Adelaide took the list, her fingers briefly brushing his, and she noticed how carefully he pulled his hand back, as if afraid he might somehow harm her with the contact. The list was standard enough: flour, sugar, coffee, some tobacco, a few other staples. She began gathering the items, aware of his gaze following her movements around the store. "I heard there was trouble at the Silver Queen this morning," she said, keeping her voice neutral as she measured out 10 pounds of flour into a cloth sack. "There was," Yates confirmed, offering nothing more. Adelaide glanced at his knuckles again. "Should I assume you were involved? A man was cheating at cards, taking money from minors who can't afford to lose it." He shifted his weight, and she noticed he favored his left side slightly, as if protecting bruised ribs. "I encouraged him to return what he'd stolen and leave town. With your fists." "He wasn't inclined to listen to words, madam." She should have been horrified, Adelaide told herself. A proper lady would have been scandalized by such brutal directness. Instead, she found herself studying him with new curiosity. "And the 2 claim jumpers everyone talks about, the ones who died." Yates's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "They had murdered a prospector and his son. 16-year-old boy, shot in the back while trying to protect his father. I found them celebrating their new claim with the dead man's whiskey." He met her eyes directly. "I gave them a choice. They could turn themselves in to the marshal or they could face me. They chose poorly." Adelaide's hand stilled on the coffee tin she had been reaching for. The rawness in his voice when he mentioned the boy told her more than his words did. Whatever violence Yates Xander was capable of, it wasn't senseless. It had purpose, direction, even if the methods were brutal. "The marshal didn't arrest you," she observed. "The marshal knows justice when he sees it, even if it doesn't come neat and clean." Yates paused, then added quietly, "I'm not a good man, Miss Brooks. I won't pretend otherwise. But I don't tolerate thieves, cheats, or men who hurt those weaker than themselves." She resumed gathering his supplies, processing this information. The other merchants had warned her about Yates Xander, told her to be careful if he ever came into the store, to make sure she was never alone with him. But standing here in the golden afternoon light, listening to the conviction in his voice when he spoke about protecting a murdered boy, Adelaide felt no fear. Just a strange, pulling curiosity about the contradiction between the man's reputation and the gentleness with which he held his hat in his hands. "Your coffee," she said, placing the tin on the counter alongside the other items. "Will there be anything else?" "No, madam. That should do it." She tallied the purchases, wrote the amount in her ledger to be added to the ranch's account, and watched as Yates gathered the supplies with efficient movements. He was heading for the door when she found herself speaking without planning to. "Mr. Xander." He turned, and for the first time she saw something vulnerable flash across his features. "Yes, madam. Thank you. For what you did with the card cheat. My father knows several of those miners. They're good men with families to feed." The transformation that came over Yates's face was subtle but unmistakable. The hard edges softened, and something warm flickered in those storm cloud eyes. "Just doing what's right, Miss Brooks." He settled his hat back on his head. "Have a good afternoon." Adelaide watched him leave, watched how other pedestrians on the wooden sidewalk quickly moved aside to let him pass, how conversations died when he walked by and only resumed when he was safely distant. The contradiction between what she had just experienced and what everyone else seemed to see when they looked at Yates Xander occupied her thoughts for the rest of the day. The second time Adelaide saw Yates was 4 days later, when she was closing up the store for the evening. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and she was locking the front door when she heard raised voices from the alley beside the building. Her first instinct was to hurry home, to pretend she hadn't heard anything, but one of the voices was young and frightened, and Adelaide had never been particularly good at minding her own business when someone needed help. She grabbed the rifle her father kept under the counter, checked that it was loaded, and moved quietly toward the alley. What she saw there made her blood run cold. 3 men had cornered a boy who couldn't have been more than 14, and one of them had a knife pressed to the boy's throat while the others went through his pockets. "I told you I don't have any money," the boy was saying, his voice cracking with terror. "Please, I was just trying to get home." "Then what's this?" one of the men growled, holding up what looked like a silver watch. "Looks valuable to me." "That was my grandfather's," the boy pleaded. "It's all I have of him, please." Adelaide raised the rifle, her hands steadier than she felt. "Let him go." The 3 men turned, and she recognized them as drifters who had been causing trouble around town for the past week. The one with the knife grinned, showing gaps where teeth should have been. "Well, look what we have here. Why don't you put that rifle down, sweetheart, before someone gets hurt?" "The only people who are going to get hurt are you 3 if you don't release that boy right now," Adelaide said, sighting down the barrel. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12, and she had won the town's shooting competition 2 years running. "I don't miss." "There's 3 of us and 1 of you," another man pointed out, starting to move toward her. "Even if you get 1 shot off, she won't need to." Yates's voice came from behind the men, and Adelaide saw all 3 of them freeze. He emerged from the deeper shadows of the alley, and in the fading light, he looked every inch the dangerous man his reputation claimed. There was no gentleness in his expression now, just cold fury that promised violence. "Xander," the man with the knife said, and Adelaide heard genuine fear in his voice. "We were just having a conversation with the boy here." "Looked more like robbery and assault to me," Yates said, moving closer with the deliberate grace of a predator stalking prey. "Drop the knife. Drop it now." The knife clattered to the ground. The man with the watch let it fall as well, and all three men pressed themselves against the alley wall as if they could somehow melt through the bricks and escape. "The lady gave you an order," Yates continued, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more menacing. "You're going to apologize to the boy, then you're going to apologize to her. And then you're going to get on your horses and ride out of Georgetown. Because if I see any of you in this town after sunrise tomorrow, I'm going to break every bone in your bodies one at a time and leave you in the street as a warning to the next piece of trash that thinks they can prey on children." The apologies came stammered and quick, and the three men practically ran from the alley, tripping over each other in their haste to escape. The boy grabbed his grandfather's watch from where it had fallen, clutching it to his chest. "Thank you," he breathed, looking between Adelaide and Yates. "Thank you both. Get on home," Yates told him, his voice gentling considerably. "Straight home and don't take any shortcuts. If anyone bothers you, you yell loud enough to wake the dead, you understand." The boy nodded and ran, leaving Adelaide and Yates alone in the alley. She lowered the rifle, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how the last light of day cast shadows across Yates's angular features. "That was foolish," he said, but there was no heat in the words. "Coming out here alone. I had a rifle. You had 3 against 1, and at least 2 of them were armed." He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and gently took the rifle from her hands. "You could have been hurt." "So could you," Adelaide pointed out. "You were unarmed." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I've handled worse odds with less reason." He handed the rifle back to her. "Let me walk you home. It's getting dark." Adelaide knew she should refuse. A single woman being escorted home by a man of Yates Xander's reputation would set tongues wagging all over town. But she found herself nodding, found herself falling into step beside him as they walked back to the front of the store so she could return the rifle and collect her shawl and reticule. They walked in silence for the first block, the evening air cool against Adelaide's face, still flushed with the aftermath of confrontation. Yates kept a respectful distance, but she was acutely aware of his presence, of the way other people gave them a wide berth on the sidewalk. "You're very brave," he said finally as they turned onto her street, "or very foolish, I haven't decided which." "Maybe both," Adelaide admitted. "I couldn't just walk away. That boy was terrified. Most people would have. Would you have?" Yates looked at her then, really looked at her, and Adelaide felt the intensity of that gaze like a physical touch. "No," he said quietly. "No, I wouldn't have." They had reached her house, a modest 2-story building with a small front porch where her mother had once grown flowers in window boxes. Adelaide paused at the gate, turning to face him. "Mr. Xander, may I ask you something?" "Yates," he said. "And yes, madam. Why do you do it? Why do you involve yourself in other people's troubles?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the mountains visible beyond the rooftops. "My sister was 19 when she was killed by men not so different from those in the alley tonight. They robbed the stage she was traveling on, and when she fought back to protect an elderly passenger, they shot her." His voice was carefully controlled, but Adelaide could hear the old pain beneath it. "I wasn't there. I should have been. I was supposed to meet her in Denver, but I got delayed. By the time I heard what happened, the men responsible were long gone, and I never found them." "I'm so sorry," Adelaide whispered, understanding dawning. Every intervention, Every act of violence on behalf of the weak or threatened was Yates trying to save his sister over and over again. "I can't bring her back," Yates continued, still not looking at Adelaide. "Can't change what happened, but I can make damn sure that when I see someone in trouble, I don't walk away. I don't get delayed. I don't fail them the way I failed her." Adelaide stepped closer, close enough that she could see the muscle working in his jaw, the tight control he maintained over his emotions. "You didn't fail her. You couldn't have known. Doesn't make her any less dead." Finally, he looked down at Adelaide, and the naked grief in his eyes made her chest ache. "I'm sorry, that was too much. You asked a simple question and you gave me an honest answer," Adelaide interrupted gently. "Thank you for that, and thank you for walking me home." Yates nodded, stepping back, that careful distance reasserting itself. "Good night, Miss Brooks." "Adelaide," she found herself saying. "If you're to be Yates, then I should be Adelaide." The smile that transformed his face was small but genuine, reaching those storm cloud eyes and softening them to something warmer. "Good night, Adelaide." She watched him walk away, his long strides carrying him back toward the center of town, and she realized with a start that her heart was beating faster than it had even during the confrontation in the alley. Yates Xander was dangerous, that much was certainly true. But perhaps not in the way everyone believed. Over the following weeks, Adelaide found herself watching for Yates with an anticipation she couldn't quite justify. He came to the store twice more on errands for the ranch, and each time he was unfailingly polite, careful to keep the counter between them, to maintain that respectful distance. But there was something in the way he looked at her, a softness that appeared only when their eyes met, that made Adelaide wonder if he felt the same strange pull she did. The town's opinion of Yates didn't improve. If anything, his reputation grew darker. He broke up a claim dispute that had been heading toward gunfire, leaving both parties with broken noses and a newfound willingness to let the territorial courts settle their disagreement. He threw a man through the window of the Lucky Strike saloon for beating a prostitute, then paid for the window repairs himself, and made sure the woman had enough money to leave town and start over somewhere safer. He stopped a bank robbery, killing one outlaw and leaving the other two so badly injured they were still in the doctor's office awaiting trial. Every man in Georgetown feared him. That much was undeniable. But Adelaide saw the pattern others missed. Yates's violence was always purposeful, always in defense of someone weaker, someone vulnerable. He was brutal, yes, but never cruel. There was a crucial difference. She learned more about him in fragments, pieced together from overheard conversations and the few details he shared during his visits to the store. He was 26 years old, had been drifting since his sister's death 5 years ago, working ranches and mines across the territories. He sent most of his pay to his parents back in Missouri, kept only enough for basic necessities. He didn't drink to excess, didn't gamble, didn't frequent the prostitutes. He kept to himself at the Garrett Ranch, sleeping in the bunkhouse but rarely socializing with the other hands, who were as wary of him as everyone else in town. It was August when things shifted between them. Adelaide was walking home from church on a Sunday afternoon when she encountered Yates sitting on a bench outside the general store, watching the mostly empty street. He stood when he saw her, hat already in hand. "Afternoon, Adelaide." "Afternoon, Yates." She paused, studying him. He looked more relaxed than usual, the hard lines of tension that normally bracketed his mouth slightly eased. "Shouldn't you be at the ranch? Day off. Thought I'd enjoy the quiet." He gestured to the bench. "Would you like to sit for a moment, if it wouldn't be improper?" Adelaide knew it probably was improper, knew that being seen sitting alone with Yates Xander would cause gossip. But the hopeful note in his voice, so at odds with his fearsome reputation, made the decision easy. I'd like that. They sat together, a careful foot of space between them, and Adelaide folded her hands in her lap. The street was quiet, most of the town either at home enjoying Sunday dinner or still at church for the afternoon service Adelaide had skipped, claiming a headache. "How was the service?" Yates asked. "I didn't go," Adelaide admitted. "Reverend Patterson gives sermons about sin and damnation, and I find them tiresome. My mother used to say that God was more interested in how we treated each other than in how many times we could recite scripture." "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was." Adelaide smiled at the memory. "She never cared much what people thought of her. She ran this store alongside my father, kept the books, negotiated with suppliers. Half the men in town thought it was scandalous, a woman involved in business. She just laughed and out-negotiated them all." "You're like her," Yates observed. "How do you figure? You don't scare easy. You do what you think is right, regardless of what people might say." He was looking at her now, and Adelaide felt the heat of his gaze. "You're kind but strong. That's rare." Adelaide felt her cheeks warm. "You barely know me. I'm a good observer, have to be in my line of work." Yates's expression turned rueful. "Such as it is. You don't like working at the ranch, it's honest work, and Mr. Garrett is a fair man, but no, it's not what I want to be doing with my life." He leaned back against the bench, his shoulders relaxing incrementally. "I used to want to study law, before my sister died. Thought I could make a difference, help people through the system rather than with my fists." "What stopped you?" "Realized the law moves too slow. By the time lawyers and judges finish arguing, people are already hurt or dead." His jaw tightened. "Can't save anyone with briefs and motions." Adelaide turned toward him more fully. "But you could prevent people from getting to that point in the first place. Good laws, fairly enforced, mean fewer victims who need saving." Yates looked at her with something like wonder. "You actually believe that, don't you? Somewhere underneath all that anger and grief, don't you still believe justice is possible?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I don't know anymore. Maybe I did once." "I think you do," Adelaide said softly. "I think that's why you're so angry, because you believed in a world that was fair and just, and then it took your sister and proved you wrong. But you're still trying to create that world, even if you're doing it with your fists instead of law books." Yates turned to her, and the expression on his face was so raw, so vulnerable that Adelaide's breath caught. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "See something good in me when everyone else sees a monster." Adelaide didn't think, just reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the bench between them. His skin was warm, calloused from ranch work, and she felt him tense at the contact. "Because you're not a monster, Yates. You're a man who's been hurt and is trying to make sure no one else gets hurt the same way. That's not monstrous. That's human." He stared at their joined hands as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "People are going to talk if they see us like this." "Let them talk." "Adelaide." He said her name like a prayer and a warning combined. "You don't know what you're saying. If you're associated with me, it could damage your reputation, make it harder to find a proper match." "Maybe I don't want a proper match," Adelaide said, the truth of it surprising her even as she spoke. "Maybe I want someone who understands that sometimes the right thing isn't the proper thing. Someone who would walk into an alley to save a frightened boy. Someone who sends his money to his parents and pays for broken windows, and makes sure abused women have enough to start over." Yates's hand turned beneath hers, his fingers intertwining with her own, and Adelaide felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. "Your trouble," he said, but he was smiling, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Says the man everyone in town is terrified of. Not you, though." "No," Adelaide agreed. "Not me." They sat like that for a long time, hands joined, watching the shadows lengthen across the street. When Adelaide finally rose to go home, Yates walked with her, and this time, the respectful distance between them felt more like a promise than a barrier. Something had shifted, some understanding reached, and as Adelaide lay in bed that night, she found herself smiling in the darkness, thinking about storm cloud eyes and gentle smiles. The courtship that followed was unconventional by Georgetown standards, but Adelaide had meant what she said about not caring for propriety. Yates began calling on her formally, sitting in her front parlor while they drank tea and talked about everything from politics to poetry. Adelaide learned that he had a sharp mind beneath the brutal exterior, that he read whenever he could, that he had opinions on everything from territorial governance to the best way to train horses. In public, Yates was always careful, always maintaining a respectful distance, aware of how people watched them. But in private, in Adelaide's parlor or walking along the creek that ran behind her house, he gradually relaxed, let her see past the armor of his reputation to the man beneath. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about his sister Sarah, who had been funny and brave and determined to become a teacher. He told her about his parents, aging farmers who struggled to keep their land, who grieved their daughter but worried more about their son, about the darkness they saw consuming him. "I write to them every week," Yates said one afternoon as they sat by the creek, Adelaide's shoes and stockings discarded beside her as she dangled her feet in the cool water. "Tell them I'm fine, that I'm working steady, but I think they know I'm lying, that I'm not fine at all. Are you?" Adelaide asked. "Fine, I mean." Yates was silent, watching the water flow past. "I'm better than I was," he said finally. "Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, working, fighting, moving on when things got too complicated. Didn't see much point to any of it except making sure I was there when someone needed help. And now," he looked at her then, and the tenderness in his expression made Adelaide's heart stutter. "Now I have a reason to think about the future. To imagine that maybe I could be more than what I've been." Adelaide reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together in a gesture that had become familiar, comforting. "You already are more than what you've been, Yates. You just have to let yourself believe it." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "You have too much faith in me. I have exactly the right amount." It was September when Adelaide's father returned from his extended business trip to Denver. Frank Brooks was a practical man, more concerned with honest dealing than social niceties, but even he had heard the rumors about Yates Xander. His first response to learning that the dangerous Cowboy had been courting his daughter was predictably explosive. "Absolutely not," he said, pacing the length of the parlor while Adelaide sat calmly in her mother's favorite chair. "I won't have you associating with a man like that. He's killed people, Adelaide, killed them with his bare hands." "He's also saved people," Adelaide countered. "Probably more lives saved than taken if you bothered to count." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point, Father? That he's not respectable enough, that he works with his hands and doesn't own property, that he's not from an established family." Frank stopped pacing, turning to face his daughter with an expression caught between anger and fear. "The point is that I don't want you hurt. Men like Xander, they attract trouble, violence. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you." Adelaide's expression softened. She rose and went to her father, taking his hands in hers. "I know you're worried. I know you want to protect me, but Yates is a good man, Father. He's been nothing but respectful, nothing but kind to me. And yes, he's dangerous, but only to people who prey on the weak and helpless. I'm safer with him than I would be with any of the so-called respectable men in this town." Adelaide, when Mother was alive, half the town thought she was scandalous for working in the store, for speaking her mind, for wearing trousers when we went camping in the mountains. Do you remember what you told those people? Frank's lips twitched despite himself. That they could mind their own damn business. Exactly, because you loved her, and her happiness mattered more than their opinions. Adelaide squeezed her father's hands. I'm asking you to give me the same respect. Let me make my own choice. And if you want to judge Yates, do it based on his character, not his reputation. Frank sighed, and Adelaide knew she had won. Her father had never been able to deny her anything when she argued logically, a trait she had inherited directly from him. I want to meet him, properly, not just as a customer in the store, but as the man courting my daughter, of course. And if I don't like what I see, if I think he's putting on a show for your benefit, I'm going to say so. I would expect nothing less. The dinner Adelaide arranged for the following Sunday was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of her life. She cooked her mother's recipes, roasted chicken and potatoes and fresh bread, setting the table with the good china and fresh flowers from the garden. Yates arrived exactly on time, wearing clothes Adelaide had never seen before, clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his hair recently cut and his jaw clean-shaven. He held his hat in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other, meeting Frank's assessing gaze without flinching. "Mr. Brooks," he said, offering the whiskey, "thank you for having me in your home." Frank took the bottle, examined the label, and nodded. "Good choice. Come in." The first part of the meal was tense, Frank asking pointed questions about Yates's background, his work, his intentions. Yates answered honestly, not trying to soften the rough edges of his life or make excuses for the violence that had marked his recent years. "I'm not going to pretend I'm something I'm not," he said, meeting Frank's eyes across the table. "I've killed men. I've hurt men. Every one of them deserved it, but that doesn't change the facts. I'm not respectable, and I'm probably never going to be by this town's standards. But I care about your daughter, more than I've cared about anything in a long time. And I swear to you, on my sister's grave, that I would die before I let anything harm Adelaide." Frank was quiet for a long moment, studying Yates with the same shrewd assessment he used when evaluating merchandise for the store. Finally, he said, "Adelaide tells me you wanted to study law once." "Yes, sir, before my sister died." "Why law specifically?" Yates glanced at Adelaide, who gave him an encouraging nod. "I grew up seeing my parents struggle with property rights, water rights, all the legal complications of farming. They were good people, honest people, but the law was used against them by folks who could afford better lawyers. I wanted to help people like them, make sure the system worked for everyone, not just the wealthy." "That's a good goal," Frank said. "Why did you give it up?" "Because it takes too long. Because people die while lawyers argue. Because I needed to do something, anything, to make the world safer, and breaking the bones of men who hurt the innocent was something I knew how to do." Frank poured whiskey for both of them, sliding a glass across to Yates. "I lost my wife 5 years ago, cancer. Took 6 months, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do except watch her suffer. You know what I learned?" Yates shook his head. "That we can't save everyone. That sometimes terrible things happen to good people, and all we can do is keep living, keep trying to do better, be better." Frank raised his glass. "My daughter sees something in you worth saving. I'm inclined to trust her judgment. But if you hurt her, law or no law, I will end you. Are we clear?" "Crystal, sir." They drank, and the tension in the room eased. The rest of the meal passed in more comfortable conversation, Frank and Yates discovering they shared opinions on everything from territorial politics to the best methods for curing leather. By the time Yates left, well after dark, Adelaide could see that her father's opinion had shifted from hostile to cautiously approving. "He's rough," Frank said, helping Adelaide clear the dishes. "And he's got demons. But he's honest and he loves you. I can see it in how he looks at you." Adelaide smiled, relief flooding through her. "Thank you, Father. Just promise me you'll be careful. Men like Yates, they don't always know how to let go of their anger. Make sure he doesn't let it consume him." "I promise." But Adelaide's promise would be tested sooner than she anticipated. In late September, a gang of outlaws rode into Georgetown, 6 men heavily armed and looking for trouble. They had been raiding mining camps and small towns across the territory, stealing whatever they could carry and killing anyone who resisted. The marshal tried to confront them, to order them to leave town peacefully, and they shot him in the street, leaving him bleeding in the dirt while they proceeded to rob the bank. Adelaide was in the store when she heard the gunshots, heard the screams. She locked the front door and grabbed the rifle, her heart pounding, remembering her father's words about Yates attracting trouble. The outlaws were efficient and brutal, taking the bank's entire cash reserve and shooting the clerk who tried to trigger the alarm. They were mounting up to leave, laughing and firing random shots into storefronts, when Yates appeared at the end of the street. He was alone, standing in the middle of the dusty road with his hands loose at his sides. Adelaide watched from the store window, terror gripping her chest, as Yates faced down 6 armed men without even drawing the pistol holstered at his hip. "That money belongs to this town," Yates called out, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Put it back and you can ride out of here alive." The outlaw's leader, a heavy-set man with a scar bisecting his face, laughed. "You're either brave or stupid, Cowboy. Which is it?" "Neither. Just tired of men like you thinking you can take whatever you want." "There's 6 of us and 1 of you," the leader pointed out. "Even if you're fast, you can't get us all. Want to bet?" What happened next happened so fast that Adelaide could barely track it. The outlaws went for their guns and Yates moved. He was faster than anyone Adelaide had ever seen, his pistol clearing leather and firing in one smooth motion. The leader dropped first, then 2 more of the gang. The remaining 3 scattered, looking for cover, but Yates was already moving, rolling behind a water trough as bullets chewed up the ground where he had been standing. Other men from the town were emerging now, some of the miners and ranch hands who had been watching from doorways and windows, emboldened by Yates's stand. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, and the remaining outlaws realized they were surrounded. They tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. 2 more fell to bullets from the townsmen, and the last one threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. The entire confrontation lasted less than 2 minutes. When the smoke cleared, Adelaide rushed from the store, not caring about propriety or safety, needing to see that Yates was alive. She found him standing over the fallen outlaws, his pistol still in his hand, checking to make sure the threat was neutralized. He looked up as she approached, and the hard mask of violence on his face transformed instantly to concern. "Adelaide, get back inside. It's not safe." "It's over," she said, reaching him and placing her hands on his chest, needing to feel that he was solid and real and unhurt. "Are you injured?" "I'm fine." His free hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing over her cheekbone. "I'm fine. Are you?" "Now that I know you're alive, yes." Around them, other townspeople were emerging, rushing to help the wounded marshal to collect the money the outlaws had stolen. Someone had already gone for the doctor. But Adelaide was only aware of Yates, of how close she had come to losing him, of how much it would have destroyed her if one of those bullets had found its mark. "I thought they were going to kill you," she whispered. 6 against 1. And you just stood there." I knew the town would back me up once they saw someone was willing to stand. People just needed someone to go first. He holstered his pistol and pulled Adelaide closer, not caring that half the town was watching. I'm sorry I scared you. Don't apologize for saving the town. Just promise me you won't get yourself killed being heroic. I promise to try my best to stay alive. He kissed her forehead, a brief press of lips that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through Adelaide's entire body. For you, I promise. The aftermath of the bank robbery changed things for Yates in Georgetown. The townspeople who had feared him now looked at him with something approaching respect, even admiration. The mayor tried to offer him the marshal's job when it became clear that the old marshal would need months to recover from his injuries, but Yates declined. I'm not a lawman, he told Adelaide later as they sat in her parlor. I don't have the temperament for it. Too quick to violence, too slow to forgive. You're harder on yourself than you are on anyone else, Adelaide observed, pouring tea for both of them. The mayor wouldn't have offered if he didn't think you could do the job. The mayor is desperate. Georgetown needs someone to keep the peace, and I'm the closest thing to intimidating they've got. Yates accepted the teacup, looking oddly delicate in his large, scarred hands. But it's not what I want. What do you want? He set the teacup down without drinking, his gaze finding Adelaide's and holding it. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build something with my hands that doesn't involve breaking people. I want to be more than the man everyone fears. He took a breath. I want to marry you, Adelaide, if you'll have me. Adelaide's heart stopped, then started again, beating so hard she was certain Yates must be able to hear it. That wasn't very romantic. I'm not a romantic man. You brought me wildflowers last week because you saw me admiring them by the creek. That's just common sense. You memorized my favorite poems so you could recite them to me. That's just good memory. Adelaide laughed, setting down her own teacup and moving to sit beside him on the settee. Yates Xander, you are the most romantic man I've ever met, and you don't even realize it. He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together in their familiar pattern. Is that a yes? That depends. What are you offering me, honestly? Not much by most standards. I don't have property or money saved. My reputation will always be complicated. There will probably always be people who cross the street to avoid me. His grip on her hand tightened. But I will love you with everything I have. I will work hard to provide for you. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the faith you've shown in me. And I will never, ever let anyone hurt you. Adelaide lifted her free hand to his face, tracing the line of his jaw, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the strong bones of his cheeks. You said you wanted to build something. What did you have in mind? I've been talking to some of the miners. There's a need for a freight business, someone reliable to transport ore from the smaller claims to the processing facilities. It's honest work, and there's real money in it if it's done right. Yates's expression was earnest, almost vulnerable. I've got enough saved for a wagon and a team. It wouldn't be easy, especially at first, but I think I could make a good living at it, enough to support a wife. Eventually, a family, if that's something you want. I want everything with you, Adelaide said softly. The work, the struggle, the life we'll build together. Yes, Yates, I'll marry you. The kiss he gave her was gentle, reverent, so at odds with his fearsome reputation that Adelaide wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Yates rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to make you happy, he promised. I swear it. You already do. They were married in October, a small ceremony in Adelaide's front parlor with her father and a handful of close friends in attendance. Reverend Patterson performed the service, though he looked distinctly nervous around Yates, who stood tall and solemn in a new suit that Adelaide had insisted on buying him. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss Yates gave Adelaide was brief and chaste, appropriate for public viewing, but his eyes promised more for later, and Adelaide felt heat flood her cheeks. The wedding breakfast was held at the house, Adelaide's friends from town providing dishes and desserts, and even some of the men from the Garrett Ranch showed up to offer their congratulations. Mr. Garrett himself pulled Yates aside, and Adelaide watched from across the room as the older man spoke seriously, Yates nodding his understanding. When they shook hands and Garrett walked away, Yates came to Adelaide's side, slipping an arm around her waist. "What did Mr. Garrett say?" she asked. "That I'm a damned fool if I ever do anything to make you regret marrying me, and that he expects to hear good things about how I'm treating you." Yates smiled. "Also that I'm welcome back at the ranch if the freight business doesn't work out, but he hopes it does because he thinks I deserve some peace." "You do deserve peace," Adelaide said, leaning into his solid warmth. "We both do." The freight business started slowly, Yates working long hours to establish routes and build relationships with the mine operators. Adelaide helped with the books, managing accounts and expenses with the same skill she had applied to her father's store. They lived in Adelaide's house, Yates insisting on paying rent to Frank Brooks even though the older man tried to refuse it, and slowly, carefully, they built a life together. The town's opinion of Yates continued to evolve. He still had a reputation for being dangerous, but now it was tempered with respect. When disputes arose, people increasingly came to Yates for mediation, trusting his sense of justice even if his methods were unconventional. He never backed down from protecting those who needed it, breaking up fights and confronting bullies with the same brutal efficiency as always. But Adelaide noticed that he was quicker to use words first, fists only when necessary. "You're changing," she told him one night as they lay in bed, Adelaide's head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Is that bad?" "No, it's good. You're learning that you don't always have to be the most dangerous man in the room." Yates's hand stroked through her hair, a gesture that had become habit in their months of marriage. "I'm learning that I have something to lose now. Makes me more careful." Adelaide propped herself up to look at him. "Don't be too careful." "I fell in love with a man who would walk into an alley to save a boy, who would face down 6 outlaws to protect his town. I don't want you to lose that courage." "I won't," he promised. "But I'll also think twice before taking stupid risks. I have a wife to come home to now." Winter came to Georgetown, snow blanketing the mountains and making the freight routes treacherous. Yates worked through the cold, determined to prove himself reliable, and Adelaide waited for him each evening with hot coffee and warm meals. They talked for hours by the fireplace, planning for the spring when they hoped to expand the business. Maybe hire another driver, purchase a second wagon. It was February when Adelaide realized she was pregnant. She waited to tell Yates until she was certain, and then she planned the announcement carefully, wanting it to be special. She cooked his favorite meal, set candles on the table, and when he came home covered in snow, stamping his feet on the porch, she pulled him inside with a smile that made him immediately suspicious. "What's going on?" he asked, shucking off his heavy coat. "Did something happen? Sit down." "I have something to tell you." He sat, watching her with those storm cloud eyes that had learned to show warmth when they looked at her. Adelaide took his hands, suddenly nervous. "We're going to have a baby," she said simply. "Sometime in August, I think." The expression that crossed Yates's face was so full of wonder and joy and terror, all mixed together, that Adelaide felt tears sting her eyes. "A baby," he repeated, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "We're having a baby." "Yes." He pulled her onto his lap, cradling her carefully as if she might break, and buried his face in her hair. Adelaide felt his shoulders shake and realized with shock that he was crying silent tears of overwhelming emotion. "Yates, are you all right?" "I'm better than all right," he said, his voice rough. "I just never thought I'd have this. A wife, a home, a child. After Sarah died, I thought all I deserved was violence and loneliness, and then you appeared and changed everything." Adelaide held him tighter, her own tears falling freely now. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, and this baby is going to be so loved." "So loved," Yates agreed, pulling back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "I'm going to be a good father, Adelaide, I swear it. I know you will be." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Adelaide continued working in the store part-time, managing the freight business accounts from home as she grew larger and more uncomfortable in the summer heat. Yates was attentive to the point of being overprotective, refusing to let her lift anything heavier than a ledger, insisting she rest frequently. It drove Adelaide half mad with frustration, but she also found it endearing. This fierce protectiveness that had once been reserved for strangers now focused entirely on her and their growing child. In August, on a sweltering afternoon when the heat made even breathing feel like work, Adelaide's pains began. Yates sent for the doctor and the midwife, and then proceeded to wear a path in the floorboards with his pacing, looking more terrified than Adelaide had ever seen him face down armed outlaws. "You need to calm down," Adelaide told him between contractions. "You're making me nervous." "I can't lose you," he said, and the naked fear in his voice made her understand. His sister, his mother's difficult births that had been family legend, all the women he had failed to save over the years, they all haunted him now. "You're not going to lose me," Adelaide said firmly, reaching for his hand and squeezing hard as another contraction hit. "I'm strong and this baby is going to be fine, and in a few hours, you're going to be a father. Now stop pacing and help me through this." The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Yates stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even when Adelaide cursed him for getting her into this situation. When the baby finally came, a boy with strong lungs and dark hair like his father, Yates wept openly, cradling the tiny bundle with hands that could break bones but now moved with infinite gentleness. "He's perfect," Yates breathed, staring at his son in wonder. "Adelaide, he's perfect." "What should we name him?" Adelaide asked, exhausted but happy, watching her husband fall in love with their child. Yates was quiet for a moment, then said, "What about Samuel? After my grandfather, he was a good man, fair and kind." "Samuel Xander," Adelaide tested. "I like it. Hello, Samuel." Welcome to the world. Fatherhood transformed Yates in ways Adelaide hadn't anticipated. He was gentle with the baby, patient through sleepless nights and endless crying, amazed by every small milestone. The freight business continued to grow. Yates hiring 2 additional drivers and purchasing more wagons, building a reputation for reliability and honesty that brought in steady work. He still had his fearsome reputation, still intervened when he saw injustice. But now there was something more balanced about him, as if the love of his family had given him an anchor, a reason to choose peace over violence when possible. Georgetown continued to grow as well, the silver mines bringing prosperity and more settlers. The town that had once feared Yates Xander now viewed him as a pillar of the community, the man you went to when you needed honest help or fair mediation. Children who once ran from him now waved as he passed, knowing he would help them if they were in trouble. When Samuel was 2, Adelaide became pregnant again, this time with a girl they named Sarah, after Yates's lost sister. Yates cried again when Adelaide told him the name she had chosen, and he held baby Sarah with the same reverence he had shown Samuel, whispering promises to this daughter that he would keep her safe, that he would be the father his sister never got to see him become. The years passed in a rhythm of work and family, the freight business expanding to include routes across the territory, Yates and Adelaide building a life that neither had imagined possible. They added onto the house, creating space for their growing family, and the office Adelaide needed to manage the increasingly complex accounts. Yates taught Samuel to ride, to handle horses, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Adelaide taught both children to read and calculate, instilling in them the same love of learning their grandmother had valued. When Samuel was 7 and Sarah was 5, a third child arrived, another boy they named Frank after Adelaide's father, who had passed the previous winter, leaving the general store to Adelaide. They kept it running, hiring a manager but maintaining the family connection to the business that had been Adelaide's mother's pride. Georgetown in the late 1880s was a different place than the rough mining town Adelaide had grown up in. There were schools now, churches, even a small theater. The silver mine still operated, but the town had diversified, attracting businesses and families looking for opportunity in the mountains. The Xander Freight Company was one of the largest employers, running regular routes throughout Colorado and into neighboring territories. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Adelaide to Denver for a week, leaving the children with a trusted friend, and splurging on a fine hotel and dinners at restaurants Adelaide had only read about. They walked through the city streets, Yates holding Adelaide's hand and marveling at how different life was from the violence and loneliness that had defined his existence before her. "You ever regret it?" Adelaide asked one evening as they sat in the hotel restaurant, candles flickering between them. "Marrying me, settling down, giving up the freedom to drift." Yates looked at her as if she had asked the most ridiculous question imaginable. "Regret? Adelaide, you saved my life. Before you, I was just waiting to die, looking for the fight that would finally end me. You gave me a reason to live, to build instead of destroy, to hope instead of just survive." He reached across the table to take her hand. "The only thing I regret is all the years I wasted before I found you." "You weren't wasting time. You were becoming the man I fell in love with. The man everyone feared, the man who was gentle only when I was in the room," Adelaide corrected. "The man who showed me that strength and kindness aren't opposites. The man who would face down any danger to protect the people he loved," she smiled. "Though I'm glad you've learned to use words before fists most of the time." "Most of the time," Yates agreed with a rueful grin. "Old habits die hard." They returned to Georgetown refreshed, ready to dive back into the chaos of their children and business. Samuel, now a serious boy of 10, announced that he wanted to learn the freight business properly, to work alongside his father. Yates was delighted, beginning to teach his son not just how to drive wagons but how to negotiate contracts, assess routes, manage employees. 8-year-old Sarah showed more interest in the store, spending hours with the manager learning inventory and customer service, her sharp mathematical mind reminding everyone of her grandmother. Little Frank, at 3, was still figuring out his place in the world, but he showed signs of his father's protective nature, always ready to defend his siblings from perceived slights. The one thing that never changed was how Yates was in Adelaide's presence. The town had long since accepted that the dangerous cowboy had a soft spot for his wife, but even after 10 years of marriage, 3 children, and a successful business, Yates still looked at Adelaide with the same wonder he had shown that first day in the store. He still gentled when she entered a room, still touched her with a reverence that suggested he couldn't quite believe she was real and had chosen him. "Everyone still talks about it, you know," Adelaide's friend Martha said one afternoon as they had tea. "How different Yates is with you." "Different how?" "Soft, tender, like you're made of spun glass and he's terrified of breaking you." Martha smiled. "My husband says it's unnerving seeing this man who once killed claim jumpers with his bare hands get all gentle and sweet when you walk into a room." Adelaide laughed. "He's not that different. He is, though, don't get me wrong, everyone respects him. Probably respects him more because we've seen both sides, the hard and the soft, but with you it's like he's a different person entirely." Martha studied Adelaide thoughtfully. "You really don't see it, do you? How much he loves you, how completely you changed him." "I see a man who was already good, who just needed someone to believe in him," Adelaide said quietly. "Yates didn't change because of me. He just stopped hiding who he really was." In 1889, when Samuel was 12, a group of outlaws made the mistake of attempting to rob one of the Xander freight wagons. They didn't know Samuel was riding with his father that day, learning a new route. Yates had just enough time to shove Samuel behind cover before the outlaws opened fire, bullets tearing through the canvas covering the wagon bed. What followed was brief and brutal. Yates returned fire with the rifle he kept under the driver's seat, dropping 2 of the outlaws immediately. The other 3, realizing they had chosen the wrong target, tried to flee. Yates let them go, more concerned with making sure Samuel was unhurt than with pursuing vengeance. "Are you all right?" he asked, checking his son over for injuries even though the boy had been well protected behind the thick wooden side of the wagon. "I'm fine," Samuel said, his voice shaking only slightly. "You stopped them." "I did." Yates holstered his pistol, his hand steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Samuel, I need you to understand something. That violence you just saw, that's a last resort. Always. I didn't want to hurt those men, but they gave me no choice. They threatened you, threatened our cargo, threatened our livelihood, but violence should never be the first solution. Do you understand?" Samuel nodded seriously. "Talk first, fight only when you have to." "Exactly. And if you do have to fight, make sure you're protecting something that matters." Yates pulled his son into a brief, fierce hug. "You did well. Stayed calm, stayed down. I'm proud of you." They drove back to Georgetown in silence, Yates alert for any sign of the surviving outlaws but also processing how close he had come to losing his son. When they arrived home, Adelaide took one look at their faces and knew something had happened. After Samuel went to tell his siblings about the adventure, Yates collapsed into a chair and let Adelaide hold him while he shook with the aftermath of fear. "He could have been killed," Yates said into Adelaide's shoulder. "If I had been slower, if they had been better shots." "But you weren't slower and he's fine," Adelaide soothed, running her fingers through his hair. "You protected him. That's what you do. You protect the people you love." "I don't want him to grow up thinking violence is the answer to everything. He won't. Because he has you as an example. He sees how you choose words over fists when possible, how you build instead of destroy." Adelaide pulled back to look at her husband. "He also sees how you stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous. That's not a bad lesson." Yates nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I just want better for him than I had, want all of them to grow up safe and happy. They will, because they have us." As the 1890s began, Georgetown was well into its transformation from rough mining town to established community. The Xander family was central to that transformation, their business employing dozens of people, their philanthropy supporting the school and church. Yates served on the town council, his opinions valued even by those who still remembered his violent past. Adelaide managed both the freight company and the general store, balancing business acumen with the needs of raising 3 children who were growing faster than seemed possible. Samuel, now a lanky teenager of 15, had his father's height and his mother's quick mind. He spent more time working the freight routes than in school, much to Adelaide's dismay, but he was learning the business from the ground up and showing real talent for it. Sarah, at 13, was already keeping books for the store and had announced her intention to attend college in Denver, a plan that both thrilled and terrified her parents. Young Frank, now 8, was the most like his father in temperament, quick to defend others and slow to back down from a challenge. "We raised opinionated children," Yates observed one evening, watching Sarah and Frank argue about whether women should have the right to vote. Sarah passionate in her advocacy, Frank maintaining that his mother and sister were obviously smarter than most men, but that didn't mean all women were. "We raised thinking children," Adelaide corrected. "There's a difference. Think Samuel will take over the freight business when he's older. I think he wants to. But we should make sure he knows he has a choice." Yates nodded, pulling Adelaide against his side on the porch swing they had installed last summer. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that I get to sit here with you, watching the sunset, knowing our children are safe and healthy inside. It feels too good to be real." "It's real," Adelaide assured him, lacing her fingers with his. "We built this, Yates, together, and it's only going to get better." And it did get better. Samuel took over more of the freight operations as Yates began to slow down, the years of hard living and old injuries catching up with him. Sarah went to college in Denver, studying business and returning home with radical ideas about women's rights and social reform that she immediately began implementing in Georgetown. Frank followed his father into mediation and conflict resolution, using words and reputation to keep peace in a town that no longer needed violence to settle disputes. More grandchildren came, Samuel marrying a miner's daughter and starting a family of his own. Sarah married a lawyer she met in Denver, a man who shared her passion for justice and equality. Frank took his time, waiting until he was 30 to marry a schoolteacher who matched his protective instincts with gentle patience. Through it all, Yates and Adelaide remained the center, the foundation upon which their family built. Yates's reputation softened further with age, the dangerous cowboy becoming the respected patriarch, the man who had helped build Georgetown into something more than a rough mining camp. But he never lost that edge, that readiness to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. He just no longer had to do it with his fists. In 1908, on a warm spring afternoon, Yates and Adelaide sat together on the porch of the house they had shared for 30 years. Yates was 72 now, Adelaide 68, and both showing the marks of a life well lived. Yates's hair was white, his hands gnarled with arthritis, but his eyes were still the same storm cloud gray, still softening when they looked at his wife. Adelaide's hair was silver, her face lined with laugh lines and the creases of age, but her smile was as bright as it had been the day she first saw Yates standing in her father's store. "You remember the first time we met?" Adelaide asked, watching their newest grandchild play in the yard with Frank's children. "Every detail," Yates said. "You were doing the books. I had blood on my knuckles. You looked at me like I was a man instead of a monster. You were never a monster. I was dangerous." "You still are," Adelaide teased. "I saw you lecture those rowdy boys at the town meeting last week. They looked terrified." Yates laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "Different kind of dangerous now, better kind." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from decades of knowing each other, of building a life together through good times and hard. Their children were successful, their grandchildren thriving, their business strong. Georgetown had grown beyond their wildest imaginings, and the Xander name was synonymous with integrity and strength. "I love you," Yates said suddenly, turning to Adelaide with the same intensity he had shown when he first proposed. "I know I don't say it enough, but I love you more than I have words for. You made me human again when I thought I was just a weapon. You gave me a life worth living." Adelaide leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "And I love you. My dangerous cowboy who was only gentle when I was in the room." "Still am," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her silver hair. "Still am." 2 years later, Yates Xander passed peacefully in his sleep, Adelaide's hand in his, surrounded by the family they had built together. The town of Georgetown mourned the loss of its most complex and beloved citizen, the man who had been both feared and cherished, who had protected the weak and punished the wicked, who had built an empire of freight and family through sheer determination and love. Adelaide lived another 5 years, managing the business with Samuel's help, telling stories to her grandchildren about the dangerous cowboy who had changed when she walked into a room, who had shown her that strength and gentleness could exist in the same heart. When she passed in 1915, she was buried beside Yates, their headstones simple but clear. Beloved husband, father, grandfather. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. Together forever. Their story became Georgetown legend, the tale of the fearsome cowboy who had been tamed by love, who had shown an entire town that people could change, could grow, could become more than their reputations suggested. Children grew up hearing about Yates Xander's courage and Adelaide Brooks's compassion, about how they had built something lasting in the wild mountains of Colorado. The Xander Freight Company operated well into the 20th century, passed down through generations who carried the same values of honesty and hard work. The general store remained a Brooks family business, though it eventually evolved with the times. But the real legacy Yates and Adelaide left wasn't business or property. It was the understanding that love could transform even the most hardened heart, that gentleness and strength weren't opposites but complements, that every person deserved a chance at redemption and a second chance at happiness. In the dusty archives of Georgetown's Historical Society, there's a photograph from 1905, faded but still clear. It shows Yates and Adelaide Xander sitting on their porch, surrounded by children and grandchildren. Yates is looking at Adelaide, and even in the grainy black and white image, you can see the softness in his expression, the love that had defined their decades together. Adelaide is smiling at the camera, confident and content, the woman who had seen past reputation to the man beneath. Under the photograph, written in Adelaide's careful handwriting, is a simple inscription. "Every man in town feared him, but he was gentle only when I was in the room. Until, with time and love, he learned to be gentle with everyone. That was my Yates. That was our life together." And in that inscription lies the heart of their story, a tale of transformation and redemption, of love that changed not just two people but an entire town. The dangerous cowboy learned to temper his violence with compassion, to build instead of destroy, to choose peace over conflict. And the strong-willed woman who saw past his fearsome reputation found a partner who would love her completely, who would protect her fiercely, who would show her every day through word and deed that she had made the right choice in believing in him. Their love story became Georgetown's love story, a reminder that people are more complex than their reputations, that change is possible, that love can heal even the deepest wounds. In a time and place defined by violence and uncertainty, Yates and Adelaide Xander built something lasting, something beautiful, something that echoed through generations. The Wild West may have been tamed by law and civilization, by railroads and telegraph lines and the steady march of progress. But in Georgetown, Colorado, it was also tamed by love, by a dangerous cowboy who learned gentleness, by a brave woman who refused to judge a man by his past, by the family they built together in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. Their story ended not with violence or tragedy, but with peace, with love, with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived and a love well earned. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.